Sorry, still had that up there. Hello, welcome back. It's been a couple weeks. We are here with special guest, Mr. Evan LaRosa, K1 Senior.
Thanks for being here.
Hi, guys. Hi there.
Oh, so excited to have you out here.
How do I get this picture off the screen?
What picture do you have on the screen?
I have a square right in the middle of the screen there. I don't know why.
Uh-oh.
River, what did you do?
I don't know. It's probably my fault.
Hey, it went away.
Perfect. Well, hey, I forgot to give you the brief. If there's any technical difficulties, we're used to them. We just keep rolling.
We keep rolling. Yeah.
We don't even. It's fine.
Sounds great. How are you guys?
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on our show.
Absolutely.
Honored you asked. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, sir, we appreciate you being on the show, and we're just going to dive right into this because I feel like we're going to take the whole time. And not only we're going to take the whole time, but guests, people who are watching, get your PJs on because we're probably going to be here all night because I've got a lot of Airwolf questions. But, sir, how'd you get in aviation?
Well, I kind of come from an aviation background. My dad was in the Air Force. He was a little late. He came in right after Korea, but he was a pilot. And then he flew in the New Jersey Air National Guard when I was a baby and flew P-51 Mustangs.
Wow.
And I have pictures of him taxiing around and me sitting on his lap in a 51 at LaGuardia Field back east. Anyway, it just was in my blood. I loved airplanes all my life, and the best I could do, close to them all the time. I built model airplanes until I had more model airplanes than brains. They were everywhere in my house. And I just grew up around airplanes, and I loved them. I loved going with him to his Air Force gatherings. And then we transferred out here to California, and he joined the California Air National Guard over here in Van Nuys. And I can remember going out there on the weekends, and they'd have parade day, and in the background were KC-97s and C-97s all lining the ramps out there. And my dad and his whole squadrons were marching around and playing the national anthems. It was just a wonderful thing, and I never got over that. And I wanted to be a part of it. So I continued having the interest and grew up. And when I realized that I did not like school and didn't want to go to college, they wouldn't let me be an airline pilot or anything without going to college. I figured if I couldn't fly them, at least maybe I could work on them. So I joined the Air National Guard and became a mechanic. And went out here to Chanute. Well, I went to Chanute, Illinois, in the school back there. You guys know that. And as a jet over 2 mechanic. Got transferred to Norton Air Force Base out here, worked on C-141s. And all the time I was doing that, I got married, and my sweet wife was using her tip money to help finance my flying lessons. So I was spending her money learning to fly.
Awesome.
I met an airline pilot at the time for Western Airlines who was going to Pierce College, junior college. And I found out he was going to start an aero club there, and I was his first student. I tried to attend junior college there. Anyway, he had a Cessna 172, and I talked him into trading time working on his cleaning and washing his airplane in exchange for flight lessons. And that worked out very well, and I went on to get my private, and was very instrumental in building a lot of time. I don't remember how I did it. I found another airline pilot who worked for American Airlines, who had a Cessna 206 that looked like hell. It was his tool. He used to go hunting, and he'd shoot a deer and throw it in the back of this airplane and fly it home, and the thing stunk, and it just looked horrible. And it was laying out there in the field. Well, I met him, and I worked out a deal with him that I said I would clean up and strip and help him repaint his airplane in exchange for flight time, which I did. Built a little more time, got my commercial rating. And then I found out that I applied for the LA City Fire Department to be a fireman. And in the meantime, I had gotten my private and my commercial and my instrument rating. Well, I got that later. But I found out that the LA City Fire Department was going to need helicopter pilots. So I talked my sweet wife again into borrowing $2,500 from the credit union. And I went out and got an add-on commercial helicopter rating on top of my commercial airplane rating. So I ended up flying a Bell 47 for, I guess it was 40, 50 hours to get the add-on rating. And it was interesting, the day that and this is a true story, the day that I took my check ride with my commercial add-on in the Bell 47 was the same day that LA City Fire was giving a tryouts for pilots who were firemen who wanted to be helicopter pilots in the department the very same day. So I literally got out of a Bell 47 and ran over and had applied for this day. And I ended up getting a check ride in a Bell 206 Jet Ranger, which I'd never touched before, with the chief pilot. And I must have had something he liked because he hired me. And I ended up spending 2 years of unbelievable training with the LA City Fire Department that most people could never buy with money. I mean, you know, with the fire department, we were doing mountains and sling loads and pulling fire hose and physical rescues. And I mean, I just, one thing, the cards just fell for me, and I was very, very, very lucky. So now I got all this incredible helicopter training under my belt. I had a private commercial and ratings, and my wife and I went out and we bought this old airplane, a Navion, a 1946 Navion, which I always loved. I just thought it was a neat old airplane. It was my closest thing I was ever going to come to a P-51 Mustang. As you know, they were built by North American, kind of had a similar look with the sliding canopy and all that neat stuff. So we bought this airplane, and my wife and I, over a period of 8 years, completely restored it. But in the interim of that, while I was working on it, I was out there at the, I'm rambling on here. You want me to keep talking?
Keep going.
No,
This is
keep
great.
going.
So there it is. So anyway, I'm out there working on this wrecked Navion one day. It was flyable, and this gentleman came out of the blue, walked up to me, and he said, "Hey kid," he said, "I wonder if you'd be interested in renting us your airplane for a TV show." And he said, "We're going to pay you some pretty good money." And I thought, well, heck, you know, can't turn down money, but yeah, what is it? And he said, "Well, it's just a real simple thing. I've got to fly over this little hill and pretend to crash behind this mountain." And he said, "By the way," he said, I need to be able to fly your airplane." Well, that cut that right off. I said, "Oh no, I can't do that. Nobody flies my old airplane. I just bought it, and I don't have insurance for you to fly," and blah blah blah. So he started to walk away, and then he turned around and came back, and he said, "Look," he said, "how about you fly it for us?" Well, sure, I could do that. What do I got to do? He said, "Well, once again, we're going to be on this mountaintop up in Santa Clarita, and we want you to fly over the camera, dip down behind this camera, out of sight, and we're going to set off an explosion, and it's supposed to look like you crashed." Heck, I could do that, you know, no big deal. So, and he said, "Yeah, we're going to pay you this much money, and we'll rent your airplane for this." And of course, my eyes got so big, I thought, "Wow, this is great." So I'm in. Well, it turned out it was one of the early Incredible Hulk series with Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno. I had no idea. I didn't ever watch the show, but there was an aerial stunt coordinator who I met on the show, and he just thought I was great. And I ended up getting a SAG card out of that, Screen Actors Guild card, because I was on camera. And once again, I had no idea what that meant. You know, all right, great. And, you know, you're going to get this SAG card, and it means you're going to get residuals on this TV show, which I did. So, I mean, once again, it was like a godsend. I was like, sure, I can do that. And now I'm a Screen Actors Guild. I'm a movie pilot. Well, I went on to fly for the fire department, and now I had this SAG card. So that kind of opened the doors to a lot of things. I started flying helicopters for not only the fire department, but part-time for some other companies. There was a company down in LA who used to fly bank checks at night. They'd pick up canceled checks from the banks, and we'd move them downtown, and we'd meet a lot of times we'd fly them into Burbank to meet a Learjet that we'd offload, and the Learjet was going to fly to New York, where the processing center was. Now everything's done by computers, but back then they literally had to move the paper all the way to New York every night. So I ended up doing that, flying helicopters at night, landing on all the downtown banks and picking up banknotes, and built a lot of time and had a lot of fun doing that. And that led to working for a company called Jetcopters, who was just starting to get involved in TV shows. They had a whole bunch of helicopters, a very wealthy gentleman owned the company. And we started flying for TV shows like Hunter and Fall Guy and A-Team, and we do little daytime things. Well, I happened to be one of the only guys in the company that had a SAG card. So I got to go fly these TV shows. And once again, it was like the dream come true. I'm getting paid all this money to go fly a helicopter, which I'd have done for free at the time. And I'd go out and had a great time. It goes on in here, and this is kind of where it led into what we're here to talk about is Airwolf. The company at the time, as you know, Magnum PI was going on in Hawaii, and it was the product of Don Belisario, the writer, a very genius individual who had a few other very successful shows. But Magnum PI with Tom Selleck and all that thing was going on. And the stunt pilot at the time for that was a gentleman named David Jones. David was a well-known movie pilot. If you remember some of the names back in the days, the Frank Tallmans and Jim Gavin, David Jones, those were some of the early well-known movie guys who were doing, as helicopters got popular, were doing a lot of flying in the TV shows. Well, David was the pilot for Magnum PI, and he was flying that little 500, the one with all the stripes on it. And that was a very successful show, and that was going on and on. Well, when that ended, David Jones and Don Belisario were friends, and I guess there had been some talk about this helicopter show that Belisario was dreaming up, about this secret spy helicopter or whatever was going to come about, and how he was going to write that. It was a very long, a lot of back and forth and things of how that was going to go, and what they could do, and blah blah blah. Anyway, out of all that comes Airwolf. And I'm working at Jetcopters at the time just as a movie pilot and a charter pilot and flying this and that. Well, David Jones, Don Belisario got together with the owner of the company, which, as I told you, was a pretty wealthy individual at the time, Peter McKernan. And unbeknownst to a lot of us working there, they started to talk about building an Airwolf helicopter, what it was going to be, how it was going to look. And I wasn't involved in any of that at the time. I didn't even know it was happening. But David was the main helicopter pilot that would be the main guy for the show, flying, doing all the stunts. So sure enough, we're going along, and all of a sudden this 222 shows up, and that's what Airwolf was. It was an early A model Bell 222, absolutely beautiful stock helicopter, which they proceeded to totally strip down and began building Airwolf. They hired a gentleman, named Tom Patton, I believe it was, to build, as you know, all of the parts that you see on Airwolf, the side rockets, the rocket tubes, the fuel probes, the intakes. All of this was done on paper and was being built out of fiberglass and the stuff that was going to go on this helicopter. And I mean, when we saw pictures, it was just like, oh my God, thing's fabulous. It was beautiful. And sure enough, it started to take shape. And there was a lot of testing. David was doing testing on how it would fly, and the FAA was involved. And the truth of the matter is the thing flew phenomenally beautiful. It was very smooth, very responsive. And of course, it looked amazing when it showed up. It was truly, all of us just couldn't believe it was there with us. So the show began to take shape, and the episodes were being written. Airwolf was being built, and we had heard the actors were going to be Jan Michael Vincent, Ernie Borgnine were the main players, Alex Cord. They were all going to, Jan was going to be the main pilot, Stringfellow Hawk. And okay, great. And then the rumor started flying around the company that there were going to be bad guy helicopters. There were going to be 500s and jet, all the bad guys that Airwolf would be taking out at some time during the show. So we were all chomping at the bit, hoping we'd get a chance to fly on some of those. And we did. There were several of us at the company that got to fly the bad guy helicopters. And once again, I from my experience in the background, I had probably the most time and had experience with twin engine helicopters. So from the fire department, so I ended up being a natural backup in Airwolf, which was pretty great for me. So anyway, the show went on, and sure enough, it became a great hit. We'd go out. There was always a helicopter in the show. There was always usually always a bad guy or a police helicopter or some sort of thing that Airwolf would have to entangle with, and if that's the right word. And we got to be very close to the actors and got to know them very well because we were flying even when Ernie or Jan was supposed to be flying. They built the phenomenal mock-ups over in the studio that Jan would actually fly, but there were times on the set when Jan would be sitting in the real helicopter that we'd had ways of making it look like they were actually in there. Anyway, that's kind of how that all came to play. And then that went on for, as you all probably know, we had 3 seasons of Airwolf here in the States. And then when it ended, the 4th season went on in Canada, where they used a lot of stock footage of all the stuff that we had shot here in the States, intertangled with some things they did up there. I don't know any of the players up there, but I don't know much about the show. But other than that, all I can tell you is it was a dream come true for me, and it was I love talking about it. So I'm open for anything I can tell you about it.
Well, all right. Well, I'm so excited about Airwolf, but I want to go back to your fixed wing to rotary wing transition a little bit. Was that kind of a culture shock? I mean, how was because I did it, and hovering for the first time it's magical, but it's also tense from fixed wing to rotary wing. What was that like?
Well, you probably know, as I do, and as an instructor too, when I was doing helicopters, it was always fun to be the instructor and to get a new student in there to hover one of those things that you would take that stick, you could hold it between your legs and talk with both hands, and the helicopter would be rock steady, or you'd be talking with one hand and flying with either. And the students looking over there going, "Oh man, this looks easy. I can handle that." And then you turn it over to him, and of course, then they were all over the sky. And that was kind of a fun thing we used to do. And the guy did it with me. The gentleman that taught me to fly a Bell 47 when I realized the fire department was going to need helicopter pilots, and I was already a fixed wing pilot, and all I needed was a commercial add-on rating about helicopters. So the guy was an elevator repairman. and his part-time love was flying helicopters, but that was his main job, was an elevator repair guy. And but he did that very thing to me. He made that Bell 47 look like it would hover by itself, and I didn't have to do anything. But you sure get an attitude adjustment on that in a hurry. But as you know, helicopters are so much fun to fly, and they take just a little bit of different skill set as far as the hovering portion. Once you can whip the hovering, the rest of it's the same. The navigation, the flying, all the other stuff. Once it gets going forward, that's all good. But when you realize you can do things like go backwards and sidewards, and stopping in midair is a different sensation than a fixed wing pilot is used to. But again, I like my son, we'll talk about later. There are some people who are just natural at it, and it comes very simple. It's like flying a fixed wing. There are people who don't have to work too hard at it. I fortunately was one of those. It came pretty quickly to me. But yeah, it's quite an experience.
Did the actors fly with you in Airwolf, or were they always either in a mock-up? Like, were they ever in the aircraft with you when you were doing these maneuvers and stunts and stuff?
Yeah, there were times that you might have to. There might have been a shot of them coming in, landing, and they never actually. I'm trying to think back. There's an insurance issue with carrying what we'll call the principals, or some people call it like the key man. If the show is about you, if anything were to happen to Jan or Ernie early on, that could have been the end of the show. So normally it was not a good practice to put the principles in the real aircraft. Maybe on the ground, we'd have them running and they'd sit in the pilot seat and look like they were touching controls or doing whatever, possibly even hovering. But I don't think early on in the beginning of the show there was much time that we actually took them flying.
Did any of them actually have any flying experience at all?
No.
Okay.
No, none whatsoever that I can recall. Certainly Ernie in his military career probably been in them, but I don't believe Jan ever, and Jeannie either. I don't think she ever had any real flying experience prior to. Because we were a charter, able to take charter and people flying, there were probably times where David Jones may have taken Jan and Ernie up just so they could get a feel for experience the actual feeling of actual flying. And, when you turn, where you're heading, what you would look at and what you would do. They probably did a lot of that as we do today in order to make the actors and actresses look, like they know what they're doing. I know that on many of the movies that I've done, for James Cameron, for instance, when we did the first, I just drew a blank. Just recently, what was the show Cameron did with the blue people?
Avatar.
Avatar. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Jim was great, and I actually flew with Jim quite a bit. He was a good guy. Loves helicopter, loves aviation. But he'd contact me, and he wanted me to teach Michelle Rodriguez to take her flying because, as you know, all of his aircraft in the movie were these helicopter-looking things. And she was great. Took her up and I flew with her for a while and let her hold the stick and do certain things. So she would know how to make the right movements, holding the collective and the cyclic and blah, blah, blah. So that kind of thing goes on pretty regularly in films that are going to involve flying. We can talk about, I've done a number of those things just where you need to kind of brief the people and get in the feel for flying and aviation.
Wasn't there in like 85-ish with a 212, wasn't there a pretty bad mishap with having actors in the helicopters, or were they extras or something on the Airwolf?
Back in that day, it was actually a 205.
Okay.
There were two 205s that were flying in a chase sequence out in Santa Clarita. There was a valley. And we had these two guys going around, literally chasing each other. It was supposed to be a bad guy, good guy, one of those sequences. And they were both 205 Hueys. And unfortunately, the rear Huey, after going around a couple of times, somehow he got slightly disorientated and misjudged his height above the ground, and he hit a berm. And it killed the stunt man that was riding with him, which was very tragic. And Scott Mayer was the pilot. Saying that I shouldn't have, but he was badly injured. But of course, that unfortunately, those kind of things are out there. We do our best to avoid those kind of things, but it was an event that took place. Gave us a bit of a black eye there for a while. Yeah.
So that was 85.
I don't remember the exact date, to be very honest with you about, but it was way back.
Yeah, it was like one of the later seasons, right? It wasn't at the beginning.
No, it wasn't early on. It was later on. But yeah, that was pretty tough for all of us. Things like that. A lot of things in the movie industry for flying took a big turn. If you guys will remember the Twilight Zone incident. Remember that that was a real eye-opener for the film business and the pilots who work in it and the FAA, because at the time we had no real guidance, no regulations, no anything, what you could or couldn't do in the movies. You could bring in an aircraft, and I mean, you know how those old stunt guys flying in buildings and all that crap they would do, and you know that kind of stuff went on. But the Twilight Zone was as I said, was a big eye opener. The pilot of that was a good friend of mine, Dorsey Wingo. Incredible. He was an ex-Vietnam pilot, very more than qualified. The accident was nothing due to his piloting skills. He was a long line pilot. He flew a fire department. He did everything. He was a great stick. But he got hired to fly on this movie, The Twilight Zone, and the scene, which unfortunately killed actor Vic Morrow and the two young Asian children that were in his arms at the time. They had a scene where the helicopter was going to hover at night and pick them up from some battle scene that was going on. And Dorsey's job was to fly the Huey in there, and however they were grabbing him on the skids, however. But they had made a lot of mistakes. They had rehearsed for a nighttime scene during the day. And as we all know, everything looks a lot different at night than it does during the day. Your depth perception, positioning, light in your eyes, whatever. There's a million things that are different when you see it during the day. And then you go out there in pitch black at night, and you've got these giant lights lighting in your face and reflecting. You know how light reflects through the windshield of those helicopters, your airplanes. And Dorsey found himself in a position, because he was new to the industry, of not knowing when to say no, or not knowing when to say, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. He was afraid to do that because it was his first movie job, and it was going to be a big deal for him to get into the business and do this great film. So they went ahead and rehearsed during the day and did everything they were going to do. And then when the nighttime came, Dorsey thought he was in the right position. The stunt or the visual special effects people who were going to set off these explosions and all this crap that was going to go on, were timing was off. And unfortunately, the story is that one of the pyrotechnics blew the tail rudder off the helicopter. And the helicopter spun down into the water and unfortunately killed the actor and the two kids.
Wow.
And of course, that was a major, major blow to, of course, Dorsey, but then, God forbid, the people who died. But it opened up a whole new thing for the movie industry. Jim Gavin, the movie pilots back then, James Gavin, Dave Jones, and some of the guys who were the original early movie pilots all got together and said, you know what? We need to build a safety manual. Let's build a movie manual. And we'll spell out how we are now going to conduct motion picture television work. And we'll run it through the FAA, we'll run it through the insurance companies, and we'll say, look, and we're going to form this organization called the Motion Picture Movie Pilot Association, which is what Kevin and I are still members of and is currently in play today. And we presented all this to the studios, to the big wheels at the studios and to the insurance companies, and we wrote this manual up, which is still used today. And we, you know how manuals are. There's always adjustments and addendums, but we always find things and we fix it. But we built this great movie manual that said, you know, here's what we're going to do from now on. There's always going to be a pilot coordinator. There's always going to be a pilot coordinator on the job on the ground. There's going to be minimum requirements for anybody flying on the movies. They're going to be commercial rated pilots. They're going to have a certain amount of time in the aircraft they're going to fly. The aircraft's going to be certified. It's going to have all the proper records and documentation, which we as aerial coordinators are going to verify before we allow this aircraft to even show up on a movie set. And then the movie pilot, the pilot's going to be vetted. If we don't know him, maybe we won't use him. We'll bring in a pilot that we know who's also experienced in that aircraft, so that we have a professional guy driving it, and not just some young or inexperienced guy who wants to be in the movie business. So we have become very protective and of the industry and of the general public in everything now that we do with the movie industry, which has really made it great. The FAA has been terrific about it. We're very happy with the quality of the people that are now doing the movies. We all have good reputations. We've carried on the legacy of quality work, and taken a big load off the FAA. When we go out on a movie set now, we actually submit minimum 3 days prior to any aircraft activity on a movie or commercial or anything. We submit a plan of activities to the FAA that spells out when, what time, who's going to fly, what he's going to do, exactly who's going to be, how we're going to communicate, air-to-ground walkie-talkies, radios, and that there will be safety briefings prior to every flight. You well know how that goes with you guys. We have very in-depth safety briefs with the pilot, and we brief the crew, emergency procedures in the event of an emergency, how we're going to knock it off. We're going to shut down. The aircraft's going to go to a safe place. The crew's going to go to a safe place. We always ensure now that we've got police, fire department, or water truck standby. We've got a fire marshal from the county fire or city fire, whoever's jurisdiction it may be, is also on the movie set. And prior to flying activities, he will review the pilot's certificates and the aircraft certificates and our motion picture approved manual or our plan of activities from the FAA prior to any flying going on the movie set. Now, that's just how it's done. And I mean, it is so much better, so much controlled, and we get the utmost respect from directors, producers. They never question anything regarding aviation. If we say, they'll come out and tell us this is what we'd like you to do, and we'll look at it and we'll decide. If we say, I don't think that's really the right way to do. How about if we do this? We can make it look the same because we feel it's safer, and immediately it's like, great, whatever you guys say. And that has really made our jobs so much better.
What did you so I guess prior to this, the early days of Airwolf, and they kind of built this show around this helicopter, was it a going-in assumption that everything would be practical effects and you'd use real helicopters, or is there any consideration to, I know they've talked about RC helicopters and stuff like that. What was kind of the mix between real and props?
We didn't have drones in those days. I mean, the practicality was it was always a real helicopter.
That's awesome.
Except the stuff that, of course, the studios could do with CGI, which even back then wasn't as prolific, as good as it is now. I mean, even sometimes I'll look at things that are done with CGI, and I can't tell that it wasn't real. I think, man, who did that? And it turns out it was CGI, but we didn't have that back then. So we went out, David Jones and the guys that were the primary people in the beginning of the show went out and shot what we call stock footage. All kinds of flybys, steep turns, figure eights, hard banks in front end. And we might have a camera sitting on a mountaintop, and David Jones or myself or whoever was flying or whatever would talk us through, give me a high-speed flyby, left to right, and now one right to left, and give me a steep pull-up with a hammerhead or an ag turn, or do something. And all of this stock footage would then be in the can, and as they were doing the scenes, the editors or whoever would go into this stock footage and pull out a piece to make that particular sequence in the TV show. But for the most part, whenever possible, we flew the real aircraft almost the first 2 seasons exclusively. And all the bad guy helicopters, we had the Hughes 500s and what they call the Little Birds, and we had Jet Rangers and Long Rangers and Augusta 109, anything that was required that could be afforded in those days, we'd fly the real thing.
8-year-old Gonky wants to know, were the afterburners real?
Absolutely.
That was my favorite part when I was a kid.
It was that or the whisper mode. And I got to tell you, you've seen it. There was a show, and I don't remember which one it was, where we did a loop. You remember the loop?
Was that Blue Thunder?
No, we had the loop in Airwolf, and the funny thing was, we got a call from the Army.
Oh.
And they wanted. This was prior to. Remember, this was prior to the Apache or the Blackhawks or anything. That back then there wasn't a helicopter that would do aerobatics. Well, we didn't do aerobatics either, but we rolled the camera. We rolled that camera so it looked like that thing did a loop. But we got calls, and they said, "Did you really loop that out?" No, we did not. But that was fun. But all that stock footage stuff, for practical purposes to generate the sequences, it was great. It was just, and we always did that. We'd go out later, and if we knew there was a show coming up that they didn't have a piece of footage for, we'd go out and shoot something if they needed it, low level, go through a canyon or a mountain or whatever, or over water, whatever we needed to help build a sequence.
There's a lot of footage. In fact, the episode I was just watching to prepare for this show, there's a lot of footage like super low to the ground, hovering, just doing pedal turns and just like 6 inches off the ground with the gear up. How did that helicopter handle? Was it pretty docile, or were you like muscling this thing around because it's a big helicopter?
Oh, you had to be very careful because the thing, you didn't know exactly. You could easily touch the ground. When we had the rocket tubes under there, I didn't do it, but I saw one of the other pilots, who I won't mention, actually bounced it off the rocket tubes because he was doing a low-level whoop-de-doo there. Didn't hurt anything, but they were really stout rocket tubes. But there was sorry, my wife will grab it. But there was a time when those things got bounced off of there. No, in fact, when I used to do my little air show routine at the air shows, my little favorite thing was to get it light on the skids where I just knew it was going to fly and suck the gear up. And the thing would be sitting like 6 inches off the ground and the wheels would come up. But that was Airwolf. I mean, for crying out loud, you had to do what you had to do. And that was always a favorite thing of mine, to suck that gear up right off the deck. And then you'd pick it up and I'd sit there and I'd bow at the crowd. You know how to do that. You'd think that was something special, but it was really nothing. You bow at the crowd, and then I bank it over here and go racing off and do a big ag turn. Anyway, that was all part of my routine. It was all fun to do. But yeah, David was the main stunt pilot. David, before I got into it, he was very good. It was all about low level because nobody had seen anybody do that kind of stuff with a helicopter before. And the reality is, would you ever do that? God, no. It was crazy. If anything happened, you were going to roll it up in a ball, but it had to happen. And he'd go down I've seen him go down the runway sideways, backwards, 6 inches off the ground, and the helicopter just flew fine. It didn't care.
Yeah,
a lot of times you've heard of compressor stall, and I've been in a few ships that did not like backing up. Certain Model A stars hated going backwards. You'd get a compressor stall out of it, but those engines on that thing, I had it going backwards and forward in all kinds of ways. I never had a problem.
Did it have FADEC? Did those engines have FADECs? No.
Hadn't been around yet.
Was mass bumping, because it's a two-bladed system, right? So it didn't have the mod to keep it from mass bumping, or because there's a lot of pushing over you see in the show.
Okay, but here's what the thing, if I can explain, what I'm going to tell you. We use the energy of the aircraft. You guys know flying jets, you talk about energy. You can make that thing do anything you want it to do by just using the momentum and the energy without jerking the controls around.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times when we push it over like that, or even in a Huey and stuff, you could push it to a point where you could avoid the mass bumping. But sometimes they would speed the film up or slow it down so it'll look more radical than it really was.
Mm-hmm.
I never experienced mass bumping in that, and I jerked it around quite a bit. But once again, it was the smoothness of how you input. You could still do a steep, ag turn or a hammerhead and stuff without jamming the controls and making it do it. Because people on the ground couldn't tell whether or not you were hitting it hard or just making it smoothly go through the motions. So even now when we're doing our film work on an A-Star and we've got our camera systems on there and, we're chasing a car down a highway or a train or whatever, you're hardly pulling any power. We're using the momentum. You get it going and you let the momentum of the helicopter do the work. And we really protect the machines. We don't abuse them. Mm-hmm. And Airwolf never got abused as far as I ever saw it. It was a well-flying, easy-to-fly machine. It was all hydraulically boosted, as you know. But it was just really a sweetheart.
Talk about doing the air shows in Airwolf. Did that run concurrent with filming the series, and were you guys just trying to generate interest?
No, I brought, after the first season, that was kind of a pet thing of mine. I brought it up to the owner. No one else had asked to do it. But because I was into air shows and airplanes and stuff, and I used to take my airplanes, I love going to air shows and stuff. But I said, during the off season, Airwolf was just sitting there. I said, how about, would you let me take it to local air shows, nothing too far away from Los Angeles, and let me just put it on display out there. And the consensus was, yeah, that sounds fun. The show was going great guns after the first season, so there were several local air shows here that I had called up and said I'd bring Airwolf to. It was the Big Bear Air Show, Point Magoo, the Van Nuys Air Show, Watsonville up there was actually my favorite, I didn't realize until I started going to the air shows, it was like Star Trek. You know how there were Trekkies?
Mover is
this guy over here. Yeah,
he's an Airwolfie.
He might have been there. I think I saw him.
Yeah, I was 2 years old, but I was a wolfie.
Listen, I got to tell you, my wife and I were so impressed. People made their own Airwolf flight suits.
Hell yeah.
They'd show up with helmets that they made. And I mean, I had Airwolf groupies.
Oh, yeah.
I was honored. I mean, and they wanted my autograph. And I'm like, I'm just a pilot. I don't know. But anyway, there's some funny stories if you want me to talk about the air shows. But
hell yeah. But first, I got a question about that. Did you wear the suit and the helmet?
When I flew, I did.
Was the helmet kitted up? I mean, what that?
It was just a shell, but on the inside we had a set of David Clarks.
Oh, nice.
Mounted inside. All of us did. For any time we flew on the set and we were wearing it, we had a specific helmets that had David Clarks inside and the regular mic, but the shell would fit over our David Clarks. But of course, the ones that Jan and Ernie wore were the real story helicopters. So they were used in the mock-up in the studios. And anytime they were on the set, they had the roads. But no, ours was just the shells with David Clarkson. So that was the only thing we had at the time, and they worked great.
So you're at these air shows wearing the Airwolf uniform and helmet with your groupies. Continue. Please tell me all these stories. I must hear them.
Well, as I said, all the shows were actually pretty good. Airwolf got to be, after the first year, I turned out being, the aircraft became the star of the show. And you know how there's always at big air shows, they'll save the best till last. Like it may be the Thunderbirds or the Blues or some famous aerobatic guy would close the show. And the reason they do that, of course, was to keep everybody throughout the whole show. So Airwolf, after the first season, I became the major draw for Watsonville, especially. Well, I'll never forget it. My wife and I took Airwolf to Watsonville one year, and in order to get there, I, of course, had to fly it there. But my wife, and my son Kevin was a baby, literally a baby, and
Lucky.
He would sit on her lap in the co-pilot seat, and we would fly Airwolf to Watsonville. And I would have to get there early before the show even opened, because they would take us and roll me back off away from anybody and put me in a hangar. And what they didn't want people to see was that when we opened up the back of Airwolf, I'd pull out baby stroller, diaper bags, and things that just did not belong in Airwolf, right? And they didn't want the public to see that stuff. So I'd get there and the truth of the matter is there was nothing in the back of the Airwolf, the actual flying Airwolf helicopter. It was just an empty shell because we kept the weight down. But all the stuff that you would see that Ernie would control, all the dials and all that crap he'd have on his stuff, was all on the mock-up in the studio. It was just very impressive. But in the back of my ship was so in order to hide the back there, we had a black curtain that we hung. It was on a curtain rod, literally behind our seats, and you couldn't see in the back. And I can't tell you how many people would, of course, during the show, when we brought it out and it was on display, would say, can we see in the back? And we'd say the usual, well, no, we can't show you that, or we'd have to kill you.
It's classified.
We can't. Well, it's strictly classified, and we're not allowed to show that to the public. Literally, that's what we had to tell people, and they'd respect it and go, okay. But anyway, that was the fun part. It was getting there with Kevin, and Patty'd get out, my wife Patty, and she'd get out with the stroller, and we'd get Kevin all taken care of. And then they'd pull Airwolf out. When the show opened, usually around 10 o'clock in the morning, the shows would open and all the other display aircraft, and they would pull Airwolf out to a point. It was all roped off. And I'd go out there and stand around in my Airwolf costume and answer a million questions. Right? Are those tires rubber? Do the afterburners work? Do the guns work? And how do you go upside down? I mean, the questions that people were asked, God bless them, were so great. I mean, I literally had a guy ask me one day if the tires were rubber. So anyway, we would sign autographs all day, and then at the end of the day, the last act of the day turned out to be me in Airwolf. Well, that turned out to be the second year I was there. It created quite a stir. You remember who Art Scholl was? Have you ever heard that name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Top gun.
Well, Art had an ego about as big as the United States, but he was an incredible pilot. But you never upstaged Art Scholl. Well, second year that I was at Watsonville, I didn't realize that Art Scholl was normally the close of the show. He'd have his little dog and aileron sit on his shoulder, and he'd throw the canopy back on his chipmunk and taxi in front of the crowd. And well, unfortunately, he wasn't the ending act anymore. I was, and poor Art's out there flying his heart out, and Smoke and God Bless America was playing, and then he'd come in and taxi, and he's waving at the crowd. Well, the air show people hooked up Airwolf for a tow bar and were towing me out. And I'll never forget, the crowd from the crowd line just went around there. And here's poor Art out there taxiing in, waving, and nobody's looking at him. And he was furious. He pulled his airplane right up in front of Airwolf, jumped out, and proceeded to read the riot act to me. And don't you ever, and here I am. Anyway.
During the show?
Right after, during the show.
Before you took off? This is like
wow. And then they pushed him aside. and there I go. So I taxied out and I did my routine, and it was phenomenal. And
did they allow the Airwolf theme to be blasted on the speakers?
What was the routine? Like, what could you do with that thing?
Well, I did all the usual stuff that you do for fun. I mean, I literally would pull it out. They'd pull it out and it'd face the crowd, middle of the crowd. And I'd get out and I'd be pulling on the helmet and walk around and look like this, some sort of big wheel. And then I'd climb in that thing. and the lights would come on, and I'd fire them both up, and I, like I said, I'd pick it up, and the minute I just get the light on again, I'd pull the gear up, and then I'd hover there for a second. Now, Airwolf's was all about the mystery, the mystique, of, So I didn't rush into anything, and I'd kind of hover for a second, and then I'd slowly turn to the left and do a little dip and back here, and did that for a minute, and then I'd turn this way, and I'd literally crank it into a steep takeoff position, and I'd roll down and accelerate, pull it up, and I'd just do a big ag turn and come back and go and do the an ag turn the other end in front of the crowd as fast as it would go, and then I'd do a real steep, like a flat Cuban, horizontal 8, real hard banks in front of the crowd, and then I'd stop and I'd turn around and go backwards and sideways. I don't remember. I just whatever felt good at the time. And I would do I'd fly for about 10 minutes, and I'd hover again in front of everybody, and then pop the wheels, drop it down, and then taxi in. So that was kind of the routine, and the crowd just went ballistic. They just thought that was, awesome. They'd never seen anybody do that before, and it was really nothing. For you and I, it was fun stuff, but nobody'd seen a helicopter. To see Airwolf do it, it was a big deal.
Did it have the props on it? Did it have like the chain guns and the?
I had all the guns.
It was kitted out.
I had it all kitted out. Had it. It wouldn't have been right without it. And it flew. You didn't know they were even there. It flew just as well. The funny story about, I think it was that very same year when I came and landed and shut down, and I got out, and of course pulling my helmet off and wave at the crowd. Out of the crowd comes this gentleman with a clipboard and shirt and tie.
Uh-oh.
And he came walking right to the helicopter with one of the line guys, and all quietly, the crowd didn't know what was going on, but who do you think that was? Well, it was our local FAA air show guy. And he walked up, and he was really nice, and he said, "Hi," he said, "I'm whoever from Fisto," and I don't know, he said, "All that looked really great." He says, "Can I see your aerobatic waiver, please?" And I said, I don't have an aerobatic waiver. I said, "I wasn't doing aerobatics." And he said, "They look like aerobatics to me. You were more than 90 degrees and more than 60 degrees and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Well, yeah," but I said, "This is Airwolf." I don't know why I thought that was going to fly. I said, "This is Airwolf," and I was just doing. And he said, "Well, all right." And then he stopped for a minute. He was really nice. Then he looks around for a second. He goes, "Oh, by the way, where's your N number?" And I said, "I don't have an N number."
It's Airwolf.
Airwolf. Once again, secret helicopter.
Once again, I said, "This is Airwolf." And he said, "Well," he said, "you really need to," he said, "when you fly at home," he said, "would you put a cardboard in the window, put your N number on a piece of paper?" I don't know. I got out of that pretty well, but that was kind of funny.
That's awesome.
And the issue with Kevin, that all went over pretty good. But that poor Art Scholl incident, I never forgot that. I felt really bad for him, and I didn't mean to, but that's just the way it went. Airwolf became the main attraction.
Well, he ended up passing away probably not very long after that, right? Because that would be the mid 80s.
As you know that he crashed filming for Top Gun.
Yeah.
And it's a very sad story. The cameraman, Frank Holgate, was one of the guys who was doing all the aerials for the first Top Gun. And as you may or may not know, most of the aerial stuff that you saw in that first Top Gun was all shot from sticks on. When I say sticks, a camera mounted on a mountaintop.
Mm-hmm.
All the low level, the passes of the F-14s and all that stuff. A lot of it was done from a mountaintop. And then, but anyway, Art was out filming, and this is a story that I heard. I never know that it was true or not, but Art was doing in his pits, was filming the inverted spin sequence for when Cruise would lost control of the 14 and they were spinning. So Art had a camera mounted on his pits, and he would go up to altitude, and Frank and the other guys were in another helicopter filming him doing this. I think they were filming him. But anyway, he would go up to inverted and roll camera, and they'd get that footage of an inverted flat spin. And on one of the events that he was out doing that, and this is a story that I heard, there was another guy, I think it was Bob Herendeen, was another famous aerobatic pilot, who he and Art were good friends, and he was actually bragging, from what I hear, to Art Scholl about how many inverted flat spins he could do before he had to recover. And so there was some sort of a competition between Herendeen and Scholl, and Art Scholl never liked to be upstage, so he wanted to do more inverted flat spins than this guy. But anyway, there was a conjecture, a rumor that Art had gone into the flat spin out there and may have become disorientated. And again, I can't prove that this was true. I just heard secondhand that Art had called on the radio during the flat spin sequence, that he said over the radio, he said, "I've got a problem here. I've got a real problem here." And then he disappeared into the water, in the ocean. And there was some theory at one time that, when you're in an inverted flat spin, the blue sky is up here and the ocean's down here. And vice versa, when you're the other way, the blue sky was here and the ocean, blah, blah, blah. And when he said he had gotten disorientated, there was theory that maybe he had literally got disorientated and lost control and went in. Then there was another theory that maybe the battery, because they relocated the battery of his airplane for CG purposes to mount the camera on it, that maybe the battery had come loose and threw the CG in the air. But nobody really knows, because they never found it.
Yeah.
Very sad. But yeah, that's stories that I had heard.
Yeah. Well, Gonky, let's take some questions from the audience. We're at the 1 hour mark. This has been awesome. I haven't stopped for a second.
Bore you with all that stuff.
No, this is
great.
AMT asked, "What's the max airspeed with all the gun and rocket pod on it?" You basically said it's the same, right? It handles, or was it any different?
We never, with that stuff on there, I once again remember that in the movie or in the TV show, Airwolf didn't basically travel with the guns and the rockets deployed. Remember, they popped out. We could put them out when they were needed. So when Airwolf was traveling between whatever sequence or wherever it was going to be in some sort of battle or whatever it was going to do, technically it would travel, rocket speed, whatever that may have been. But for us, the helicopter, 120 to 130 was a pretty normal, simple cruise. It would go faster, but we never pushed it. But anytime we had the pods or the rockets out there, and we had them out, we were actually doing maneuvers. So flying speed at that point could be anywhere from a hover up to 60 or 100. It all depended what it took to stay in camera, for the camera helicopter or whatever we were doing. But maximum speed, we never really pushed it hard.
John would like to know, are you still instructing and taking new students? Because I think we've got some volunteers here.
To be honest with you, no, I'm not anymore. I'm sort of retired and given that up, but thank you for asking.
Yeah, that's Colin says, what limitations? Well, here we go. Maneuvering or G limits. So we talked about airspeed. Did it change the maneuvering and G limits for, I guess, helicopter? You're not really.
Once again, the guns and rockets that Tom Patton had built for that thing were so incredibly stout, the way he built them to mount on the pods, the gear pods. I think I'd have broke the helicopter before I'd have broke those rocket pods off. They were hung on there. They slid into these giant tubes that were on. We took the caps off those landing gear pods that are on a normal 222, and he had built a whole structure in there where the guns that he built would literally slide into these, and then we had pit pins that would lock them in. And so those were on there. When they were on, there was no way they could come off. But we were never limited because, again, we didn't pull any really hard G's on that thing. I don't think I ever pulled more than a G and a half in that, which 2 G's would have been a lot.
Right.
turn that thing around. It wasn't made for that. I don't remember what the positive, negative G load. I'm sure negative was nothing, but the positive was not very much. But we didn't. We never bent it hard with especially when we had all the stuff outboard, and it was filming. So it was all just a matter of, again, using the energy to make it look like we were doing these high speed, high G things that we really weren't doing.
Kevin, did Bell ever come out and like scratch their heads? Like, what are you guys doing in this helicopter?
Oh, Bell was very on board and instrumental in the original building of it.
Okay.
So there was a lot of discussion with them about how we were going to mount the wing pods, and they weren't so involved from a structural safety standpoint, because everything we were doing, more than we weren't compromising the aircraft frame or structure in any way. The stuff was all decorative, and like the fiberglass nose, the fuel pod, those were just fiberglass things that were literally screwed onto the original nose bowl. The rocket pods underneath were actually hung on brackets that were under there for if they were to put skids on it or floats on the 222. They were normal brackets you'd find under any helicopter. So the pods were manufactured to literally bolt right to those points. And the weight of those things, they were not very heavy. They were just for looks. And the same goes to the pods on the outboard. Now, the big side pieces that were put on there that gave it that big wide look and the extra inlets and stuff, those were fiberglass. You and I could literally pick one of those up and walk off and set it down. They were just screwed onto the side of the aircraft.
Did it make did it make it experimental at that point, or did it still hold its certificate?
No, we were all experimental.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So
we didn't carry passengers or anything.
So the whole type certificate, like the actual aircraft, became an experimental aircraft at that point?
I am trying to remember if we went into restricted or experimental. It might have been restricted. I'm embarrassed I don't remember, but it certainly was a normal category. Yeah.
Yeah. Looks like Mover's frozen.
I'm back.
Look at that. There's two movers.
Yeah, there's too many movers. I told you we played through the pain. Chrome just decided it's gone.
Well, it's something only Mover would know.
Verizon tells you you're done talking on your phone, they disconnect you. Anyway.
Yeah, the dog picked up the phone. She's busy right now.
Yeah, we're back to one mover. That's good.
You're good. So anyway, that was all the fun stuff with Airwolf, and like I said, for me as a pilot and being involved in it, was like I was it was an honor and something that you go through life and I look back and go, wow, that was truly a great experience for myself and the other people who were involved in it.
So if you had to remake Airwolf, what would be the helicopter you would choose? What's today's Bell 222?
A Bell
222. Man, I haven't thought a lot about that. I'd be curious to know what those special Blackhawks looked like that were used in the ones looking for Osama bin Laden.
The stealth Blackhawks.
The stealth Blackhawks.
Yeah,
might be an interesting thing.
I'd take Airwolf from the 80s.
A 430.
I'm biased. Yeah, I'm biased, man. I can't.
Here's Wombat.
Wombat.
He's here. Unlike me. Nathan says, hi, Alec. Here, Mr. Kevin, what's the funniest thing you did or experienced doing Airwolf or any other movie? Funniest. Alec is...
Yeah, he's
the kid that watches the show.
Yeah.
Wow. I think, like I said, the funniest thing for me was going to air shows and acting like I was somebody important and signing autographs and things when, and showing off Airwolf. And having my son get his baby equipment out of the back of that thing, I always thought was probably the funniest thing.
Did you have to land it like another airport to drop off your wife and your son, or did you just come early enough to where there wasn't anybody around?
No, we'd come back, fly right in and out of Van Nuys. But like I said, I'd get to the air show before the show opened, and whoever was there, they wouldn't know what was coming out of the back of it anyway because they'd tow me into the hangar. We'd close it off.
I got you. That's awesome.
Laura says, thank you for the insight into Twilight Zone accidents and old tragedy, but it's important to remember the lessons learned and the lives lost. Yeah, thanks, Laura.
Absolutely.
And then Bob says,
Bob,
would that insane flying we saw on Chips even be allowed nowadays? I mean, that episode Mover showed a few weeks back. So I did an episode of Chips not too long ago where he flies the 500 under the bridge with Ponch chasing down this bad guy. And they're basically doing pedal turns around the guy in this rock quarry. Is that kind of stuff, or even the stunts you did back in Airwolf? I mean, do you think that would still fly today?
We do it all the time.
Okay.
I mean, even recently, Kevin, my son, actually dropped off 3 stunt guys on the back of a moving train. I've flown under that 6th Street Bridge. I don't know how many times myself. It's perfectly doable. And once again, as long as we have taken the proper precautions with the FAA and the aircraft's approved and there's no harm to the public and there's not going to be any public within 500 feet of that operation. We do that stuff continue all the time. It's done quite often. Let me just put it that way. There's nothing really tricky about it. There's actually more room under there than you might think. It looks pretty scary doing it, but to the public, but that's the whole idea.
Yeah. Ghetto Streamlabs says this is the greatest show ever, and I agree.
I agree.
Nathan Alex is back, says, how big of a fan are you of Airwolf? Do you play with them? Do you play the theme when you fly a helicopter? Yes.
I can't tell you how many times that I've been on a show where I'm flying a helicopter doing a stunt that has nothing to do with Airwolf. It reminds me of Airwolf, and even like one of my cameramen that we fly with pretty regularly. All of a sudden, I'll hear him going over there, da 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 da, and there we are doing this. I mean, it comes back all the time. You think about it.
So my kid, like from when he was like 3 years old, he'd say, "Hey, play the Uncle Mover song." And I play the intro to Airwolf.
Did you hear it? Like, did they play it while you were filming? Like, did it give you motivation? Like, when were you hearing the Airwolf song during your travels?
No, we didn't hear anything other than the coordinator, the ground coordinator, or the camera pilot giving us instructions on what we should be doing. Like, give me a hard left now. Okay, bring it to a hover. Hard right now. Pull up. Do this. Do that. Turn around and face me. Hover right in my face for camera. When we're flying on a set, we are 100% paying attention to what we're supposed to be doing from a safety standpoint. I don't think even when I was doing the air shows, I know they played the music because I was told they did, but I couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
Again, I was listening to the show controller.
Did you ever fly with Corky Fornoff?
Corky is a very dear friend of mine. Done a number of movies with Corky. We did a film called The Phantom in Thailand. And Corky flew a biplane for me. I was flying a camera ship. And Corky was a great grand. In fact, I just spoke to him, I bet last month. He's a model airplane guy like myself, so we talk quite a bit about model airplanes. But he's an incredible pilot. He's got a great history, if you know about he and his dad doing their routines in Bearcats.
Yeah.
But yeah, Corky's a great guy, and I've done a number of shows with him and worked with him. He's good. It's great.
Yeah, this is a super.
He moved to Texas.
Oh, really? Yeah,
he lives in Texas now.
If Airwolf was real, how much would the gross weight be? That's
Geez.
Well.
I have no clue. Help me with that, guys.
I have no idea. But if a certain person were to find a Bell 222 and maybe make it look like Airwolf, would I get sued?
There is actually 2 or 3 complete mock-ups of Airwolf that have been built. One of them is hanging in a helicopter museum in Tennessee right now.
Okay.
Another one was in a showroom over here in Burbank, California.
Mhm.
And there's another one in a gentleman's backyard up here in Thousand Oaks. He's got it in his backyard that he bought, and it's sitting back there. It doesn't fly, but it's a full mock-up. I don't think you could be in trouble for doing that. I mean, it's what they call public knowledge now.
I want to buy one and build one and fly it.
Okay, well now you could be sued.
I think didn't the original one get wrecked?
The original one was sold and was crashed and destroyed. I heard it went to Japan and crashed in Japan. We actually, when we were finished with the show, we put it completely back in stock configuration. Put the interior back in it. They repainted it, and it was sold as a 222. It couldn't be sold, obviously, as over.
Do you remember your last flight in Airwolf? And like, did
Pity
you
flight.
Yeah. And did you realize it was your last flight in Airwolf?
No, I'm sorry about that.
Was it sad sending it off when you're watching it be put back together? Where you're like, there's never going to be one like this, boys?
Well, like I said, we were all at the end of the show. We were all sad. All of us that worked on it, the stunt guys, the pilots, all of us were like, "Man, we gotta suggest to the studio to find Sinjin, and let's keep the show going." And here's what I understood to be the sad part about what happened. I don't know if it's public knowledge, but as you all well know, Jan had a serious problem with drugs and alcohol, and it affected his performance at the end of the last season of the show. My understanding at CBS said that they would not support the show financially anymore unless they got rid of Jan. And as it turned out, Jan actually owned a piece of the show. He had a very small percentage of ownership. And so I don't know whether he refused to give it up or wanted to carry on his portion of it. If CBS carried it on, he would make money, and they said no, and they pulled the plug. And that's where it ended. And again, this is all, I was not on the need to know list, but that's the rumor that we'd heard down the rumor mill.
Could you tell, like, just seeing him on set, was it kind of a train wreck? Or
yeah, there were a couple of times where I had seen that they had a hard time even getting him out of his trailer to say his lines. It was pretty sad. They kind of kept it pretty, pretty quiet, pretty undercover. But once again, the rumor floats around the set. It's pretty hard to keep all that, hidden, and you hear things. We as pilots, a lot of times the aviation portion of any show, any movie, anything, we kind of fall under what they call a second unit. First unit would be where the actors, actresses might be, and they're doing all their dialogue and lines. And we as stunt people, the pilots and stuff, we would not really be right there in their face. We may be on another set shooting all those plates or doing a sequence for the show far removed from first unit. In fact, we may even be a total set different days. It'd be very rare that I would be on the set with Jan or Ernie or anybody unless the aircraft was specifically involved in a particular scene that they were doing, and where I may have brought the aircraft in for the show or for the scene and just be in the background when they're doing their scenes of getting in and out and whatever they were going to do. And then at the end of the scene, when they were done, I'd probably fly the aircraft home. They were done.
Colin says, for the HX1 episode, did you fly the S-76 or Airwolf for that dogfight sequence? Probably the best sequence I can remember in the series.
I didn't fly either one of those. The S-76 was flown by the owner of our company, Peter McKernan, and the Airwolf helicopter was flown by David Jones for that particular sequence.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a pretty neat deal.
Yeah.
That S-76 belonged to Jetcopters at the time as well. So it made a good something, a different aircraft, to put into some show.
Well, sorry, Gonky, you got something.
I was just going to ask how in those 3 seasons, how many hours did you get flying Airwolf?
You know, I don't remember, Gronk. To tell you the truth, I don't recall. I didn't think of it as hours flown. I mean, I'm sure I put it in my logbook, but I don't remember what the total was. It was so many years ago.
Yeah. Well, so it was 3 years of your life. You've had a storied career. What was next for you? And kind of talk us through what you did after Airwolf.
Well, my movie career kept going. I developed quite a good name, a following, and got a lot of calls from various directors, producers to work on. As I said, I think I told you earlier on that I have, according to my IMDb file, I've done over almost 400 feature films. When I say I've done them, I've either flown on them, coordinated on them, some sort of an aviation sequence, flew the story ship or flew a camera ship. A lot of those were flying camera ships. I didn't even have story ships. I might have been just shooting aerials of a car chase or, an airplane doing something. So in all of that, what happens with guys like myself, there was like 10 of us that were pretty steady and pretty well known in the industry. We'd have certain directors who liked working with us, and they'd all have their favorite pilots, and I worked my same guys for years. Every time they did a movie, they'd call me and say, "Hey, Kev, we're doing this movie this year," and we'd put together a program. The way it works is I'd get a call from, let's say it was Jim Cameron. He'd call and say, "Hey, we're going to do an aviation movie, and need you to fly on it." And what I would say is, "Well, great, send me a script, and I'll break it down." And from that script, I would go through and read the script and break down any of the aviation sequences that I would have to do for his movie. There may be a lot of aerial camera work, and it'll say, aerial shot of car driving down a highway, or shot of airplanes, dogfighting, whatever it involved. And I would make my list. I'd break down the script that I have all of these scenes that I would have to shoot for his movie. And then in that, I would tell him how I would shoot those. For this chase a car, I'd use a helicopter with this camera system. And, for an aerial sequence, maybe I'd use an airplane with a camera mounted on it and do a little air to air. And that's generally how a movie goes. For all of us, is a breakdown of the script. A good example here. Recently, I did a movie called The Plane with Gerard Butler. Gerard Butler. It was called The Plane, and I got a call from the producers and saying we're going to do this movie, and it's about an airliner, and we'd like your involvement in the movie. So they immediately sent me the script, and I broke it down that he was going to be flying this airliner, and there'd be aerial shots of the airplane on the ground, taxiing. There'd be a gunfight in the back door. It turned out it was a DC-9 with the back door. But the interesting thing is Gerard was not a pilot and has never been a pilot, but he's an incredible actor. He's an unbelievable actor. So I said, why don't you give me Gerard for a couple of flying lessons? So once again, I can teach Gerard to look like an airline pilot. And myself and a friend of mine from Southwest will get together with him, and we'll talk him through the dialogue that a captain would take when flying an airplane. For instance, he would get in the cockpit and they'd go through the pre-checks. And there's certain things that he would say to the co-pilot, like airspeed alive, 80 knots, cross checks, V1, rotate. These are all things that he would have to learn to say and in the proper sequence. And so I taught him to do all that stuff for the movie. And if you ever go back and watch the movie The Plane, it's actually really good. He does an incredible job with playing the captain. He's very believable that he's flying that airplane. But that kind of thing would happen in a lot of the films that we would do. When we did the movie The Phantom, as you mentioned, Corky Fornoff, I broke down that script that there was a biplane sequence that we would have a stunt girl on the wing of the biplane and climbing out, jumping on a horse. And I had to say, gee, who would be one of the best pilots that I'd need to fly that biplane and do that stunt? And of course, Corky came right to mind because he was a credible aerobatic and qualified in the airplane. So Corky did that sequence, but we broke that all down, and I filmed it from a helicopter with him. But that's kind of how the sequence of making the movies goes. And it gets pretty involved. When we did the movie Zero Dark 30, which I'm sorry to interrupt you brought it up about which aircraft we would use. Catherine Bigelow did that movie about Bin Laden, and I did the aerials on that. We did the two Blackhawks flying in the nighttime. If you saw the movie, you know what they were heading to look for him. The interesting thing is, at the time, I didn't have any Blackhawks. So when we talk about computer-generated images, and this we did also with Top Gun, which I'll talk about, but I needed two aircraft to fly in the dark, low level through the mountains, and we actually used A-Stars. And I filmed them from another A-Star flying through these canyons. And at the time, they can computer generate any airplane you want on top of the actual movements of those real aircraft so that those A-Stars looked like Blackhawks, when in fact, as I said, they were A-Stars at night. We did the very same thing on Iron Man. I did the Iron Man 1, 2, and 3 movies. And on Iron Man 1, if you remember, I mean, you want me to go on with this stuff again? I'm eating up your time here.
There's no time.
No,
there's no time.
Keep
Continue.
going. This is
Keep
great.
Going. Yeah.
Iron Man, if you remember the sequence when he's flying and then he's attacked by the two, what were they, F-14s?
The Raptors.
F-22s.
Yeah, it's a couple of Raptors. He outruns a
So,
AIM-9.
of course, I couldn't come up with a couple. I couldn't come up with a couple of Raptors, so I said, "Well, how are we going to shoot this jet sequence?" So I actually got two very famous movie pilots, jet pilots, who you guys will know, Steve Hinton and Johnny Maloney, to come out and fly a MiG-17.
Wow.
And a Sabre, F-86 Sabre jet. And
that's cooler than the movie.
It is.
And I had those guys fly for me, and I was in a helicopter, and I had Steve do flybys by my camera for these quick flybys and stuff that I was going to need for Iron Man. And then we had the computer generated the Raptors on top of the actual movements, so it looked like they were real Raptors. And I mean, the quality of CGI is even more phenomenal today than it was then. But that was a lot of fun. And then on Top Gun Maverick, Kevin had to do a similar thing. As you know, there's only 1 or 2 CGI shots in Top Gun Maverick that were not real with the F-14s. The one where they're in flight, and the takeoff sequence was all done with a rolling full-size mock-up. But Kevin actually shot that F-14. I forget what airplane he used, but then they CGI'd the F-14 on top of that. So all fun stuff, all movie-making things.
Are you still friends with Gerard Butler?
I am.
Can you get him to say, "This is Airwolf"? Going back to your previous, can we just circle back to that one and have him say that? Because that's the ultimate crossover right there.
He might be able to play it.
If you've ever seen Gerard, if you ever watch any movies Gerard has done, he's a phenomenal actor. I love his stuff.
You also did Independence Day.
I did Independence Day.
Yeah, that was early CGI, right? I mean, that's where we're starting to have CGI everywhere.
We Roland Emmerich, incredible director and imaginative guy. And when we did that, the sequence, I brought down a sky crane. And Hueys are pretty easy to come by, but we wanted this sky crane sequence, and we actually built. Remember the big light bar that's hanging over that?
Yeah.
Welcome wagon.
Yeah, the welcome wagon.
The welcome wagon.
Welcome wagon. That actually was real.
Holy
Wow.
cow.
We built that, or I had it built, and we hung it under the sky crane, which I got from a company. It was Siller Brothers, I think. They brought that thing down, and we built that deal to hang under there. It actually worked, and we filmed the whole sequence with it at LAX. Obviously, when they were hovering next to the spaceship and blew up, was not real, but
you didn't use real spaceships?
So,
yeah, we hired the spaceships to come in. That was pretty fun. That was a good show, and
so the two Hueys and the Skytrain were crane were real.
they were real. They were real for some of the sequences.
Right.
I had I had a T. You know what a T-28 is, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I had a T-28. I needed a camera ship. I needed an airplane that would go fast enough that I could keep up with warbirds. There was nothing else out there. And when I did Pearl Harbor, I used this T-28. I built this T-28, and we built mounts for the wings. I had a good buddy who was a real genius, and on the T-28 model that I had, it had the pylon supports, which only came, if you know T-28s, they had them on some C models, but the Fenix and a lot of the airplanes they used in Vietnam had the pylon mounts, and they had guns and rockets mounted on them. But I had a C model T-28, and I didn't have pylons, but I needed to build some. So we found pylons, and we got drawings from North American and how to put these pylons on this T-28 that I had, and we built pylon mounts. And inside those, they were actually 28-gallon World War II fuel tanks that we took, and we cut the front off one and the back off another and mounted them on this wings of this T-28, so that one camera that we built inside these units was looking forward and one would look back. So we'll talk about Pearl Harbor, because that's where I used it for all that. But on Independence Day, the scene where Will Smith is being chased through the canyon by the alien ship, well, I shot that for real with my T-28 in what was called the Little Green Canyon, which was actually a canyon just east of the Grand Canyon. It's a real canyon, and it's just outside the Grand Canyon, so you could fly in it, and I did. But I took the T-28 down inside this canyon, and I flew down through the thing, and it was a lot of fun. It was a little scary, but it was kicking the ass.
Can't imagine the cost per hour on that alien ship.
Yeah, crashed it. But so that sequence was all shot for real using my wingman on the T-28. And if you ever go back and watch that again, and the funny thing is I see it all the time, but nobody else probably notices. But because that camera was mounted out on the wing, if you can imagine, whenever I bank this, left or right, that camera's over here. So the scene was moving where it shouldn't have been. It should have been more online, but it's actually moving a little bit, which actually played pretty cool when they played it back and they actually put the Will Smith in there and then they put the alien thing in it. So that whole sequence just before the pull-up, actually did the pull-up, but they crashed them. So I shot that with the T-28, was all part of Independence Day. And that's where I first used that, and that worked out great. But then I used that again on Pearl Harbor, if you want to jump ahead to Pearl Harbor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
On Pearl Harbor, I needed something. I had it now. It was an airplane that I could go out and dogfight with the Zeros and the P-40s. And on that show, we had a multitude of aircraft, which Steve Hinton and the boys, I don't know, do you know Steve Hinton and the guys from Chino, the Chino Air Museum? And Steve's a Reno Air Racer, famous Reno Air Racer.
Oh, okay.
Steve Hinton. But anyway, he and his son and all the guys out there are the best warbird pilots around. And I'd hired them to come over and fly for us on Pearl Harbor. So they floated, I don't know if you know this, but on a barge, we had all the P-40s. I think we had 3 P-40s, 3 Zeros, a B-25, the helicopter, my T-28, all on a barge that was towed to Hawaii. And it took 8 days to tow those things across the ocean to get to Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
And when we got there, they were all offloaded on Ford Island. We literally owned Ford Island for that movie.
That's
I
awesome.
mean, it was phenomenal. And for guys like us, the Warbird guys, to be out on Ford Island and when we were playing there, but I was going to revert back to walking around, you could see the bullet hits in the concrete where the Japanese were strafing Ford Island. They're still there. And the bullet holes in the hangars. I mean, it made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. If you're into that thing. But anyway, we owned Ford Island. We had a ball. So I used this T-28 with these camera mounts on it. And we actually had the back seat. We took the canopy off, and I bought an old T-28 canopy, and we cut the back side of it off so that my cameraman, who operated from the back seat, he had monitors, and I had monitors in my face, so I could see what he was shooting. I could see both cameras, what they were filming, and I could tell what I tell him to shoot. And then, so what he could do, we had a little camera mounted on a tripod looking straight back. And if you go back and look at that movie and you see the scene where the P-40s and the Zeros are all flying and you see the tail of one airplane, that green tail is the tail of my T-28. We painted green to look like the Zeros that were following us, so that the camera looking back, it looked like just another Zero, but it was our tail was painted green. Anyway, David would get up on his knees and turn around and film backwards behind the T-28 when we weren't using the wing mounts. But then we'd use those wing mounts when I was flying down. We literally, and for real, some of those scenes where we're flying down between the hangars in Pearl Harbor, we were down in the hangars, and we own the place. I was chasing them, they were chasing me, and that was the idea. Because they could be behind me, chasing me and shooting at me, and I'd be the Zero or vice versa. We'd trade places, and we'd get all that footage. And it was just such a great time. One scene that everybody always likes to talk about is the scene where the P-40 goes up and he flies. He's got Kate Beckinsale on his lap, the girl, and they're flying up in the beautiful clouds and stuff. I shot all that for real using the T-28. Chasing Johnny Maloney, who had a dummy on his lap, a female dummy. And we're up there, and I got to tell you, we flew up there for 45 minutes in the beautiful sun, the clouds over Hawaii. But it was weird that all of a sudden we were done filming, and we didn't know where we were. There was a moment of panic. Looked around and we couldn't see any land, and suddenly, as a pilot, you suddenly get this momentary. We don't like to not know where we are. Right. And there was a moment where we weren't sure which way was back to Ford Island, but we turned around opposite where the sun was and immediately headed to the ground, and there we saw it down. But I never forgot that momentary. Wish I hadn't done that thing. I paid more attention to where I was. But we were having such a beautiful night up there, and the whole scene was used in the movie. It was great. So that was good.
Did you ever get any working with the Warbirds like that? Did you ever get any flights in them?
Well, I don't know if Kevin told you, but I own the P-51.
Oh,
he did not.
He did not mention that.
What do you have? Let's go through the arsenal. What do we have in the hangar?
So I probably owned 10 airplanes in my life, but
Go on.
I had a T6 for 12 years, a North American T6, which I loved. And then I bought the 51 with a partner of mine, which is still here at Van Nuys. Awesome. I had that for about 4 years. So absolutely, I don't need to tell you guys, a phenomenal airplane. Awesome. My dad flew Mustangs, as I told you, and when we bought this airplane, it was just bare metal polished. I liked it very generic. All it had was a serial number and a black nose and a couple of stars and bars. It was absolutely beautiful, well polished. Awesome. And that's the way I liked it. I took that to many air shows, and Kevin Jr. got to ride in the back seat. And unfortunately, he was too young to fly it. But the T6, the T-28, and the Mustang were all great airplanes in my life. I never got to fly a P-40. I would like to have. I did fly a P-47 Thunderbolt once.
Wow.
And that was the easiest airplane I've ever flown. Yeah, the Mustang is a very easy airplane to fly too. Just the thing that most people, if you're not familiar with the airplane, are those big airplanes, is the horsepower. You find yourself, if you get slow and were to cob the power in that, you find yourself in a torque roll situation that you may not be able to get out of if you're low to the ground. Other than that, the airplane, you got to remember in World War II and stuff, these were kids flying these airplanes. So they were very simple to fly, but just wonderfully quick and responsive, and more of an ego trip than anything else. I mean, I'd taxi him and comb in my hair. I mean, that was just
put out the cigarette.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Groupies, the same Airwolf groupies show up for your P-51.
Yeah, you get out and go, yeah, I fly a Mustang.
Yeah.
No, but that was great. Really fun stuff. And Kevin will never forgive me. That was the end of my Warbird era before he was old enough to get to fly any of that stuff.
Do you call, so are you K1 to his K2 to each other?
I'm K1, he's K2.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know where that got started, someplace on a show, but that stuck, and it's always been that way.
Bob says that even now, Airwolf is in a canyon someplace, abandoned, forgotten, and waiting to be found by the right pilot. Cue the intro. I volunteer as tribute. Just throwing that out there. And then Aaron says, quick answer, best pilot, K1 or K2?
K2 without a doubt.
He would probably say the opposite, I bet. No one.
He probably would, but I got to tell you, he's qualified in so many things now. He's even got a right seat type rating in a C-130.
Wow. Just like Gonky.
No, don't you do it. Don't
There's
you
a picture.
do it.
Look, Gonky. Yeah. Look at that.
There you are.
Yeah.
There's a company, a friend of ours that's got a C-130 up here in Castle.
There you go,
Gonky.
Gonky.
A lot of our films, and he got the right seat checked out, but he's flies a Phenom 300.
Yeah.
All the helicopters. He's qualified in the Black Hawk, the Learjets. I couldn't be more proud. He's fun.
Awesome.
Anyway.
Crazy Pete C-130 FE. Speaking of C-130s, who are the movie pilots you admire most, past and present?
Oh, yeah.
Other than myself?
Right.
Perfect answer.
Right. That's the fighter pilot answer.
No, right now, like I said, I can't talk about my kid more than I do. He's phenomenally good at everything he does, and he's actually a very big part of our motion picture pilot associations. We've got some very good names, well-known names in the business. Craig Hosking, Steve Hinton, David Jones has unfortunately passed away, all the old timers. But that's about it.
If you can talk about it, because I know sometimes Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
You did Mission Impossible 3, I think, right? Was one of the movies you worked on?
I did. I just flew a camera helicopter on that, yeah.
But later on, he got qualified in an A-Star.
Yes.
And did those scenes. And we were talking about earlier about the principle being, insurance purposes and stuff like that. How does that work? And from your perspective, an actor doing all this stuff, like, does it make the hair stand up on the back of your neck saying, hey, if this goes wrong, we just lost Tom Cruise? Or like, because I know he did really well in his Airbus training in Dallas. What do you think about all that? And how does that work?
He's a damn good pilot. He actually does very, very well. He's got a Mustang 251. He flies it himself.
Yeah.
He takes his flying very serious. He also, I think he's got a Honda jet now that he flies.
Oh, wow.
The corporate jet. But he takes the flying very serious when it comes to that. And I know he took the helicopter flying very serious too. But he does all of his own stuff, as we well know. and he's very gracious about it. He's I've had very little direct interaction. Kevin Jr., my son's had a lot more than I've had. Once again, like when we did Mission Impossible 3, I didn't interact with him at all on the set. I was second unit doing my stuff. But the few times that I saw him on Maverick, he was very gracious, very serious about the whole thing. But he takes the flying very serious, and in the pilot briefings and everything on Maverick, he was insistent that safety was the utmost. Anything that they were going to do, safety was first, and whatever he wanted, which he wanted it to be as real as possible, he totally relinquished all of that final decision making to the pilots, the Top Gun guys, and Kevin and the commander. I can't tell you how great it was to have him be that way about those things.
Yeah, I think that's why.
Did I answer that question?
Oh yes, sir. Gonky, you said.
Yeah, I think that's why like those films are so good. I mean, the all the computer stuff is great for fill-ins, but I think too much of it takes away from like the plot and the storyline. It's nice to have real airplanes and as much as reasonable that the actors doing real stunts and flying and whatnot. I think it just adds to the production.
What we have to do now, or what we kind of insist on doing, is if there's an actor involved, we actually ask for a waiver from the studio for him to fly, because he is the principal. And like you say, if anything were to happen, it could. I mean, what's happened when, like Robert Downey Jr. just breaking his ankle, put guys out of work for months. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty tough on the crews when these guys insist on doing, the stunt at the risk of getting hurt. For the most part, they respect that. But if they do want them to be in the aircraft or they do want to fly, we will go, at least I always do, and I know Kevin does, we'll go to the studio and ask for a written waiver that so-and-so can be in a flying aircraft.
Are you still actively working, or are you supporting K2? Like, what are you doing now in the film business? Have you kind of taken a step back, or are you still actively flying, or what's happening now?
No, I've taken a step back. I'm still capable, and I'll help him out if he needs. Like, for instance, he'll call me to be his ground safety pilot on a given day that he may be flying. He might be on another show, or he may be flying the stunt with the aircraft, and he'll need a pilot on the ground. So I'll be the guy talking to him on the ground, making sure that the scene's ready to shoot, the camera's ready, all the safety precautions are in place before I let him come in and do the scene. So he'll call me a lot of times to do that. Or I may ride shotgun if he needs a co-pilot. But for the most part, I've taken a step back and push everything his way now. Actually, I don't even get any calls anymore. All the calls are going in, and I'm happy about that. I'm grandpa now.
Yeah. What's your advice for somebody who wants to get into the industry at this point and do what you've done?
I wish you hadn't asked me that question. It's a very tough one to answer.
Yeah.
Because it's asked of us all the time. And I'm trying to think of the easiest way to say it. It's one of those things that it happened because you either had a piece of equipment that was needed, or you were in a place where you worked for somebody who brought you in.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not something that you apply for or train for. Mm-hmm. There's no place to apply for it or train for it. Those of us that got into this business got into it by, for lack of a better word, by accident, or being in the right place at the right time. As I said, in my case, remember that old airplane I had?
Mm-hmm.
Interest. I didn't know I was going to be a movie pilot. I suddenly had a SAG card, and I flew an old airplane in a movie, and then I went to work for a company that was in the business, and I graduated that way. Kevin got into it because he grew up in it with me. He was on the set with me a lot of times, watching me fly, doing what I did, and grew up in it. He learned all the ins and outs of production and insurance requirements, and it's a lot more than flying.
Right.
I mean, the flying is important because you get a reputation for being a good, safe pilot.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of great sticks out there, good pilots, good, who can drive an airplane better than me. But here's where it gets more involved in what we do. And what I say is there's a lot more to it. You have to understand camera, filters, lighting, camera lenses and sizes, positioning. All of those things take effect when let's say I'm flying a camera helicopter and I'm filming a sequence of going on the ground. My cameraman who's flying with me, who his job is camera, may say to me, let's film over here because I need to get the right sun angles and I need good reflections, or I need to get certain lighting on here. And I'm going to be shooting with a 25 mil lens or a 50 mil lens or a 100 mil lens. Well, that tells me a lot about how I'm going to fly the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to be closer? Do I need to be farther away? Do I need to be more on the sun angle? It's a lot. You see where I'm going with this? There's a lot.
Absolutely.
Just saying, hey, you're a great F-16 pilot, so I'm going to let you fly with me. And by the way, you know anything about you're going to be, I'm going to use this lens on you. You have no idea what I'm talking about. So it's not something to get into because you want to be a movie pilot. There's avenues, I guess, you could go to get into the industry. You could get involved in production work as a second unit, as an assistant director, an AD, or a production assistant, where you would get to know somebody. And I know a guy who ended up flying a helicopter on a movie because they found out he was a pilot. He also was a SAG pilot, but he also knew somebody, the director, and he had a helicopter. So he ended up flying his helicopter on a movie, and he actually got a name for himself. So it was right place, right time, right person he knew. So I don't want to sound, arrogant or cocky to people out there that suddenly say, oh, it's a good old boys club or something like that. It's just right place, right time.
Yeah, it's Hollywood. You got to get your big break.
Yeah,
Without your big break,
exactly.
you have no break.
I hope I answered that. Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And Nathan says, did you work on Midway?
I did not.
I didn't
work
see that
on
there.
Sorry.
I
think the last Midway looked like it was a whole bunch of CGI stuff.
It was.
I don't think there was a lot of real flying in that anyway. And I didn't. There was probably an aerial advisor, like they have military advisors on a lot of military shows, who is an ex-military guy who's there to say, they wear this colored uniform, that color backpack. There might have been an aerial guy who said, well, a Dauntless will do this and do that. But, I didn't work on that one.
Luna has arrived, by the way, in case people were wondering. She has been listening. I asked that question specifically for her. Now she's sad because she can't go be
doesn't look like she cares one bit.
She can't be a stunt dog because
Nope.
she doesn't know anybody. She's like, and there she goes. Yeah, that's awesome. Gonky, what do you got, man?
So you don't fly anymore, but you still do fly for fun, right? In the Super Decathlon, is that right?
Yeah, I like to keep myself into it a little bit. I still like flying. My big thing today is if I'm home with the grandkids or I'm building model airplanes. I am a model airplane fanatic. I bet I've got 35,
Oh, wow.
40 model airplanes all over this house, in my garages and everywhere. And I've got a collector car that I like to go to car shows. But
What kind of car?
well, I have a very rare. It's a '59 Chevy sedan delivery. If you know what that is,
It's a 59 Chevy. What is it?
Sedan?
'59 Chevrolet
Okay.
car body. Remember the one that had the big old wings in the back?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They
Well,
used to call it the Batmobile back in its day.
hell
It's
yeah.
a '59 Chevrolet sedan delivery, which is very rare. It's a station wagon with no windows, and it used to be, in its day, it was a minivan. It was a work truck. And it's not a truck though; it's a car body. But anyway, it's a fully restored '59 that my wife and I
Yep.
like to take to car shows.
Doug found it. This?
That's it. That's not mine, but that's mine. Mine's
Yeah.
like it. It's silver. But I know that car.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you pulled that right up.
Now that Doug. Doug's on these things. He had some your 1984 air show picks too, but we didn't have time because we were rolling through stories so well. Because that was awesome.
Well, I talked your ear off there. I hope I didn't.
Oh,
No. Well, K2 does models too, right? Because we saw his models in the background. Or were those your
Yeah,
models that you built for him?
He's been flying model airplanes since he was little too, and radio control. And I had him out there flying. He loves it, but he doesn't have any time for that anymore.
No.
When he goes on the movie set, he always buys one and he flies it on his days off. So he still stays current. In fact, those little jets you saw hanging in his office, I think he's got an F-16 and an F-18 hanging there that he bought on Top Gun Maverick and was flying them back there on the movie set. You know, he did the movie Devotion too. Did you guys see Devotion?
That was a great
I read
movie.
read the book and watched the movie.
And some of the scenes that didn't make the movie were like, why'd they spend so much time on the story? We should have gotten more airplanes.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but for me, the best, I should say this, the best part of the movie was the flying.
Hell yeah.
All that stuff that he shot, again, using Steve Hinton and all the boys from the Chino out there, the air race guys, they flew all those scenes and he shot them for real. I mean, he did beautiful work with that L-39 he's got. But on that show, I know that he and the guys bought radio control models and were flying them on the aircraft carrier model they had out there on the set.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's into that. But that's fun. Keeps me out of trouble.
Yeah.
All the best people are.
I don't fly anymore because I shake too much.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I'm going to crash them, so I get too nervous. So I build them and I hang them in my garage.
What was your favorite of the? I mean, you've flown so much. Like, if you had to pick one, helicopter and one fixed wing, just to fly, what would be your favorite of those two? I know Airwolf is probably my number one, but if it's not Airwolf, it's okay.
Well, I think certainly Airwolf was fun to fly, but as far as a favorite ship that I would use on a regular basis, like work or anything else, the A-Star is by far, I think, the best aircraft out there.
Wow.
We use it for everything. It is powerful, it's strong, it's fast, it solves our needs. Am I blinding you guys here? The A-Star is probably my favorite helicopter. Airplane wise, I have some favorites. I think the P-47 Thunderbolt was one of my favorites.
Wow.
Certainly the Mustang was a beautiful airplane to fly and a tremendous honor for me to fly it because I know my dad flew them and anywhere I would take that to air shows and stuff, I was really proud to show that off. And I'd give rides in it all the time. I was honored to give people rides. In fact, I'll tell you an interesting story if we got time for one more story.
Always.
Oh,
Always.
yeah.
Got all. You keep it trucking. Yeah.
And this has probably happened to a lot of P-51 guys, but I got a call one day from a young man who said he'd heard that I gave rides in the Mustang and he would like to give his dad a ride in this Mustang. His dad was a P-51 pilot in World War II and survived. And if I start crying right now, don't laugh at me. But the kid called me and he said, would I give his dad a ride in this airplane? And I said, well, sure, I'd love to. And I said, my only the only thing I require is that he's got to be able to, I said, is he still mobile? He's got to be able to get in and out of the airplane by himself in case anything happens. Can he get out if we have to get out? And he said, oh, yeah, he could climb out of the, if he had to get out of the back seat. I mean, I'd certainly be there to help him, but I couldn't have him be like ambulatory or something where I couldn't even get him in the air. He said, no, he's perfectly fine. I said, all right, well, let's pick this day. So we pick up a nice Sunday morning that we're going to give this guy a ride. And I had the airplane brought out and parked out in front of my hangar. It was all polished and looked beautiful. And the gate from the street was right near my hangar. And up the driveway or this alleyway comes this caravan of cars. And I was sure one of them might have been this guy. Well, they pulled up to the gate. And I was standing there waiting, and I was going to open the gate, and I opened it, and I looked in the front car, and here's this elderly gentleman sitting in the right, and all of a sudden I see him just go like this. And he put his head in his hands, he put his hands down, and he started bawling, started crying. And I realized it was him, and I waved him to come in. And the whole caravan parked out there, and the young son drove the dad in. The man got out of the car and he walked right to the airplane and he put his hands on the wings and he kind of walked around like he was petting this thing. And I'm standing there and I'm starting to tear up watching this guy. And he walked around and he just petted the airplane and then he stopped and he walked back to me and he come up to me and he said, are you the pilot? I said, yeah. And he said, son, this airplane saved my life in World War II. I'm like, holy shit. I mean, that just tore my heart out. Anyway, long story short, we went flying. He had a ball and came out and couldn't stop hugging me after it was all over. That was a story I couldn't forget. And then another time, talking about warbirds, I was flying a helicopter, and these people hired me to fly 4 folks up to King City, California here. And I was to pick them up, I think in Camarillo out here. And I had a long ranger, and I flew out there and I landed. It was just a charter for me as far as I knew. So I landed, I picked these 3 young men up and one elderly guy, an older man. And I heard them say, Dad, why don't you go ahead and sit up front with the pilot for this helicopter trip? So this man gets in the seat next to me and I get him all buckled in and the other guys all hopped in the back. So we're flying along and you ever get the sense, and you might, I got the sense this guy was looking at the instrument panel. He was looking at the gauges. And I just had a sense that he kind of knew what he was looking at, because he was looking at how fast we were going and altitudes and stuff. And I finally said to him, I said, I noticed you're looking at the gauges. I said, you know anything about aviation? And he very quietly, he started to mumble a little bit. He said, yeah, I've done a little flying. I said, oh, great. And I said, what'd you fly? Yeah, for a Spitfire. I said, excuse me? You flew a Spitfire? Yeah, for a Spitfire. Said, Jesus, really? I'm a warbird fanatic, so God, really? Yeah, he said, I flew in the Battle of Britain.
Oh, dude.
I said, what? So we get on. Anyway, he said, we get talking, and he said, yeah, he said, I made the ultimate mistake. And I didn't know what that was. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he said, I was chasing a German in an Emmy whatever, shooting at this guy, and he said I ran out of ammunition, and he said I broke off the attack. And I still didn't know what you guys might guess out right now what he meant. He ran out of ammunition, and he pulled up. Well, a German pilot turned right around, came after him, shot him down. He spent the rest of the war in POW camp.
Oh.
Holy
Wow.
wow. I mean, there's some stories in your life that you don't forget. Now, those were 2 that just always resonated with me. That was something.
Wow.
How many of those guys from the war that you don't even realize, don't even talk about stuff they've gone through? It's like, wow. Anyway, That's my story. I'll stick to it.
You got any more? We need more.
I don't know. It take me so long to think about it all.
No,
Yeah.
No, but I've enjoyed talking about these with you guys. I hope you enjoy
Oh
it.
yeah, we've had a blast having you on the show. Thank you so much. Even though
Yeah.
you crushed my dream of owning Airwolf, you said I'm going to get sued, so I'm sad now.
Well, you could be one of these guys who builds these things in their backyard and then they video them trying to learn to fly it. But you already have.
That
So
would be about right.
what helicopters do you fly? What do you?
OH-58A,
Okay.
which is kind of like a 206, R-44, Bell 505, R-22.
Nice.
So I'm just scary enough right now. I'm dangerous.
Yeah.
It's still very scary. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I love flying helicopters.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad you
And
enjoyed
you know why? Because of you. Because of Airwolf,
it.
I became a helicopter pilot.
Well, good. I'm glad you're doing it. Enjoy the heck out of it. It is fun.
Yeah, I'll talk Gonky into it one day.
Yeah,
I guess one little thing I'll just say, and I always told my son this, and he lives by it. And I said, if something's going to happen, it's going to happen when you're effing around. Don't ever, especially in the movie business, and whatever you're doing, don't be showing off or acting up or doing anything stupid.
Yeah.
You just do that in front of somebody, and your career is over.
Yep.
100%.
Anyway,
100%.
that's all I got, gentlemen.
Well, hold on now. Are you going to write a book? And have
No.
you written a book?
No.
Why not? Because this is all gold. Like, just go back and watch this show and just start typing. Voice to text if you have to. You're not a good writer like Gonky if you have to hunt and peck. But your story is so awesome that you need to write this book.
Yeah, all right, I'll consider it, but I have to fit it in between model airplanes and babysitting my granddaughters.
Oh, perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, sir, it's been an honor, privilege, pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on tonight.
It has been mine, guys. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you much, and keep up. Be very safe out there, all right?
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. And thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next week.
Have a good night.
Take care.
All
Good
right.
night, everybody. Thank you. I don't know how to get out of here, though. Leave.